Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Cuts International, let me welcome all of you to this webinar today on cyber safe business practices. This is under a project which is supported by the US State Department, more particularly by the Public Affairs Center of the US Consulate in Kolkata. We are working with a number of stakeholders in Eastern India, including Northeast India, under this project. So we are very happy to partner with the US Consulate Public Affairs Center in Kolkata in implementing this work. Of course, there are a number of challenges that we are facing. We used to face more of them. Now this number is now the constraints or challenges they are less. Primarily, it was due to COVID because this kind of work it involves a lot of field visits, interaction with people, getting them on board. So I am going to make, I'm not going to deal with the details of them, because that's not the point of organizing this webinar today. So I'm going to make a couple of very brief remarks. Uh, you see, one lesson which we have learned from the COVID pandemic, or as an aftermath of COVID, or as a result of COVID, I'll say not aftermath, is that our business, including small business, they are becoming more and more digitized. There are pros, there are advantages, there are as well as some disadvantages to that. Whether it comes to digital payments or it comes to electronic commerce, this digitization of our business, of our not just business, not just trading, but also in of the production process is going to become more and more in future. So what we are going to see, we are already seeing that there is going to be more and more servicification of our activities, including manufacturing. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story, while our small and medium enterprises, they are getting involved with this quote unquote new normal. They are interested. At the same time, they are also facing issues. And there are a couple of issues that I would like to flag. One is, both are related to cybersecurity. One is that they are not much aware of the kind of cybersecurity threats which can jeopardize their business and the kind of loss or challenges that they could face going forward. And that makes them a bit risk averse as well. The second thing, even if they are aware, I see that many of them are facing constraints related to the cost of having a better cybersecurity system in their business operations. And there I would like to link that, of course, the cost is there, but somehow they have to incur it. If we can marry, not merge, definitely not. If we can see how, and many of these services actually related to cybersecurity, they are not just being provided by big companies like Cisco or whatever, but also by small enterprises, and many of them are startups. If we can link our small and medium enterprises with startups, providing such solutions, such services, then I think it's going to be a win-win situation for for both, for both sets of stakeholders. So with that, so our initiative is to see how aware our small and medium enterprises are, what kind of awareness generation that they need, and also to see to it that in some manner or the other, how can we link them with the right kind of guys. So I'm very happy to see today's panel, and many of them are working exactly on this subject. So this is going to be a good platform for us to explore such linkages. So on that note, let me now welcome Monica Scheid. She is the American Center Director and Public Affairs Officer at the US Consulate in Kolkata. She has also served as Information Officer at the US Embassy in Dhaka, Consular Officer at the US Embassy in New Delhi, and Public Diplomacy Officer in the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the US Foreign Service, she taught language and literature in public schools and universities in New York, in Burma, in Cambodia, and in Thailand. She holds a master's degree from Teachers College, Columbia University, and a bachelor's in English literature from Miami University in Ohio. So as you can see, you just heard me, she has very rich experience of India and this region in particular. So we are very happy to work with her in this project and in other projects also, which we are doing in partnership with the US Consulate in Calcutta. So over to you, Monica. So for your welcome remarks or opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee, and thank you to CUTS. CUTS has been a really fantastic partner for the U.S. Consulate Kolkata on a number of different issues that are of great importance to both the United States and India. So we thank you for all of that good work. So welcome to everyone to this webinar, Cybersecurity and Best Practices for Small and Medium Enterprises. And thank you to all of our experts who are here to speak on the subject. Anil Bhardwaj, Secretary General of Federation of Indian Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. Thank you for coming. Tulika Pandey, National Director of the National Governance Division, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India. Thank you. Ranjit Rain, Manager, Technology Policy Research for the Reserve Bank Information Technology Private Limited. Rahul Sharma, founder of The Perspective, a private enterprise working on cyber policy, cyber and data privacy risk advisory. And finally, Dr. Karnika Seth of Seth Associates. So thank you to all of you for being part of this, and we really look forward to hearing from you and learning more about the subject. So the State Department, along with the U.S. Department of State, along with partners around the world, we work to respond to shared threats in cyberspace. We advocate for multi-stakeholder internet governance. We promote and protect internet freedom, and we preserve the openness and functioning of the internet against control by repressive states. So those are some of the objectives of the US government. And the US and India have actually had quite a long and strong relationship in various ways, but particularly in expanding our cooperation to fight a broad range of criminal activity, including cybercrime. So whether carried out by foreign governments or criminals, cybercrime is a growing threat. It's a threat to the United States. It's a threat to India. It's a threat to the world. So the United States and India have worked together to protect personal user data, industrial designs, critical infrastructure, and other systems vital to both of our modern societies. This cooperation has ranged from daily information, policy coordination. So through the US-India cyber dialogue, the United States and India have strengthened our computer emergency response team, CERT, operation, and we have exchanged best practices on malware forensics, critical infrastructure protection, and combating disinformation. During the inaugural US-India dialogue, cyber dialogue in 2020, the United States and India set up working groups to exchange best practices and agree to explore cyber capacity building. As leading democracies in the Indo-Pacific and indeed the world, we stand prepared to ensure that our peoples and those of other nations have the opportunity to thrive in a rules-based international order. So again, these are some of the objectives of this program. The United States government has itself been a victim of cybercrime. And as a result, the new Biden administration has proposed to launch an urgent initiative to improve our capability, our readiness, and our resilience in cyberspace, and to protect against malign efforts worldwide. During his very first national security speech, President Biden spoke of elevating the status of cyber issues within our government. This is a real threat. The threats we face and the threat actors are more diverse than at any point in our history, and no country at present is globally cyber ready. We all want to increase productivity and efficiency. We want to drive innovation. We want to deliver economic growth. And while increased internet connectivity can lead to economic growth, securing the underlying cyber infrastructure is essential. E-commerce is growing. The information and communications technology sector has been one of the great success stories of the US-India economic relationship. In fact, our combined efforts have made a significant impact on the economies of both of our countries. In India, the over $160 billion industry makes up about 8% of GDP and directly employs an estimated 3.7 million people. Virtually non-existent 30 years ago, the sector's growth has developed thanks to the talent and investments of both countries. But new technologies involve risks. So to help entrepreneurs and particularly small business owners in East India understand and mitigate e-business risks, the US Consulate Kolkata has partnered with CUTS to run a series of cybersecurity workshops for business practitioners in Guwahati, Ranchi, and Patna. The workshops are actually the second iteration of our cybersecurity project with CUTS to help the region cope with the growing threat of cybercrimes, particularly as businesses move online. The workshops will consist of week-long trainings with the objective of improving the capacity of MSMEs to safely navigate the digital space and mitigate cybersecurity risks. Following the workshops, a compendium of best practices will be developed. So our goal is to help businesses understand cybersecurity vulnerabilities, trends, and also effective mitigation techniques to protect their networks. Building on the momentum of the Digital India campaign, our project addresses the risks, challenges, and opportunities of e-commerce and entrepreneurship in a digitally empowered society and knowledge economy. So once again, we thank you all for being here. We look forward to hearing from the experts to better understand how we can take these efforts forward to continue to strengthen the US-India partnership in the digital revolution. So thank you, and over to Kapil Gupta, the Assistant Policy Analyst from CUTS. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Monica, for your excellent remarks. I think you have set a really good foundation for my presentation. So let me share the slides here. I hope it is visible to all. Are the slides visible?
Yes,
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So I'll be making a brief presentation on the briefing paper on cybersecurity challenges for MSMEs. The paper is an output of the ongoing study called CyberSafe East, as was mentioned by Mr. Chatterjee and Monica. The goal of the study, as was rightly mentioned by Monica, is to build the capacity of MSMEs so that they can safely navigate the cyberspace and mitigate cybersecurity risk. So in the presentation, I will discuss the increasing adoption of digital technologies by the MSMEs, growing cyber threats, types of some common cyber attacks, some vulnerabilities and challenges of MSMEs towards cybersecurity, and some best practices to cyber safety. So the significance of digital economy and its contribution to the Indian economy has been well recognized in recent times. The digital economy is expected to contribute up to 20% of the GDP by 2024, which is estimated at $1 trillion. This is also driven by increasing adoption of digital technologies in India. To just give you an overview, India is the second largest digital adopter among major 17 digital economies. This can also be witnessed from the increase in the number of digital transactions from 31.3 billion transactions in 2018-19 to 45.7 billion transactions in 2020, which is about an increase of 46%. And all of these digital technologies are sustained on an infrastructure called as cyberspace, which has its own vulnerabilities and threats and can cause detrimental impact on the businesses as well as the economy. And MSMEs hold a very significant role in the economy, contributing an estimated of about 30% to the country's GDP. And considering the capacity and capital constraints of MSMEs, recovering from a cyber attack is also very daunting. And thus, it is very imperative for the MSMEs to understand the risk and safeguard themselves against any cyber threats to be able to continue growing and contributing to the economy. MSMEs are also increasingly using and adopting digital technologies. A 2018 survey by Kantar of MSME respondents, about 2,254, across 34 cities in India, showed that about 35% of the MSMEs adopted business management software, whereas 40% of these respondents were based in tier 2 cities. This signifies that the adoption is not only restricted to tier 1 cities, but has spread across the board, going beyond tier 2 cities also. Also, 43% of the MSMEs were using online banking, while 80% of them are using a computer or a desktop, and about 35% of them are using smartphones for their business operations. Although these figures are from a 2018 study, the numbers may have likely increased, especially after COVID-19 pandemic and the acceleration that was witnessed due to work from home and physical working constraints. And also there is a lot of value for MSMEs to adopt digital tools, as their revenue can grow up to by 34% according to a report by KPMG. So this brings us to addressing the elephant in the room, cyber threats. And they may come in discrete and disguised forms, and the attacks can be multi-stage and or coordinated. Among the ones that are listed here, malware and phishing attacks are the most common and prevalent. And as you may see on the graph, these states have reported the highest number of cyber crimes between 2014 and 2019. And there has been an exponential increase in cyber crimes in the immediate preceding years. Similarly, in 2019, India reported the second highest phishing attacks in the world after the US, whereas India lost about 1.25 trillion rupees in 2019 just due to cyber crimes. And India is also the second most cybercrime affected country in the world. And this represents the significance of cybersecurity for India. This brings our focus. About 60% of the cyber attacks are aimed at MSMEs. And out of this, about only 60% of the companies never recover from that, thus making them most vulnerable to cyber attacks in India. And there are some fundamentals that may hinder the MSME businesses to adopt cybersecurity. First and foremost, lack of awareness about the importance of cybersecurity, as well as assessing if the business has been attacked or breached. Similarly, it is reported that MSMEs often outsource their regulatory and technology compliances to third-party vendors. It may so happen that the vendors may also not have a comprehensive cybersecurity framework, thus making sensitive information of those businesses vulnerable to cyber threats. Similarly, it is found that cybersecurity may not be a top priority for most of the businesses, specifically MSMEs, on account of lack of capital allocation or lack of understanding the risk. And MSME businesses prefer to allocate the capital towards expansion of their businesses than cybersecurity. Another vulnerability that we have found is the use of personal devices by employees of MSMEs on workplace networks, and thus exposing the network to cyber threats. Similarly, considering the increasing demand for skilled and qualified professionals, there is a supply shortage as well. This point also goes back to capital allocation, where the available cyber security professionals may also come across as expensive, and all of these challenges, although are interdependent, but each of them are equally very much important. Now, there are still some ways which can provide a decent protection from increasing cyber attacks. Although this may look very general, but are very important in a way. And first and foremost is awareness and capacity building of management as well as the employees. It is very important that management recognizes the cyber threats and vulnerabilities to their business and take proactive steps to safeguard themselves. Then the primary approach could be installing a firewall and a threat management system, and also to patch any vulnerability in the software. It is essential that one should update all the softwares regularly as well as backing up the data. It is also important to note that paid softwares should be installed instead of free antivirus softwares and other digital free tools. Similarly, one must also regularly revisit passwords and use multi-factor authentication in all the online activities to the extent possible. Last but not the least, businesses should engage IT experts and professionals to assess the needs and vulnerabilities, as well as help to assess service providers or vendors if they have a decent cybersecurity framework. Now, moving forward, these are some of the issues that could be further discussed and addressed by the eminent panelists, and thus would also help us better understand the issues and challenges for MSMEs around cybersecurity. So, for example, what could be the MSME's approach and preparedness in view of upcoming personal data protection bill? What could be the cybersecurity compliances that MSMEs should be concerned about? What are the challenges that MSMEs face during implementation or adoption of cybersecurity? What are the role of the government in creating awareness amongst MSMEs and preparedness towards cybersecurity? And last but not the least, and very important, how do you ensure cloud security for MSMEs? So as a feedback from this webinar, along with the briefing paper, as next steps, we plan to organize the capacity building workshops, 3 capacity building workshops, each one in the city of Guwahati, Patna, and Ranchi, between the months of March and May 2021. And depending upon the COVID situation in the concerned location, the design of the workshops may be either virtual or physical or hybrid. And as a consolidation of all the learnings after the completion of the workshops, we will also prepare a compendium of best practices by the end of May 2021. And I just wanted to highlight that Mr. Deepak Maheshwari and Mr. Rahul Sharma are also the members of the key resource group in this project that we have formed to take guidance from them to effectively achieve the goals and objective of the study. And we are looking forward to their valued guidance as well. And with this, I end my presentation, and I now kindly request Mr. Maheshwari to take the lead in the panel discussion. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Kapil. And so Monica and Bipul for your initial remarks. And as Kapil just mentioned, this webinar is only one step in a long journey that we are undertaking at CUTS in partnership with the US Consulate in Kolkata. And obviously the outreach, the way originally it was planned to be sort of a physical affair, but because of the COVID situation, obviously we are doing it in a different manner. Now, one thing, as Bipul also mentioned and Monica earlier said, that this is something because of the COVID, the pace and the acceleration of digitization has actually increased. And within India, apart from the formal MSMEs that we see, we also have a huge informal sector of micro enterprises, especially I would say the mom and pop shops, as they would call in the US, or in India, we would call them independent business owners. Now, there could be small shops, there could be even somebody selling vegetables or something like that. Now, the interesting thing that we have observed since November 2016, when the demonetization happened, and of course, again, we saw this further second wave of, I'll say, towards digital payments in 2020 because of the COVID. And suddenly what we observed that many small shops, many small vendors, and others also, even street hawkers for that matter, started accepting digital payments. And at times they would actually insist that can you make a payment through a mobile wallet and things like that. So on one hand, we are seeing this type of a rapid adoption. Second thing we are also seeing is that a lot of MSMEs in the country are actually selling and buying, both selling as well as buying a lot online. For example, there are a lot of marketplaces, there are a lot of both by Indian and MNC companies, and they're using these type of services. So inevitably, everybody is using a lot of ICT tools and technologies and the ways of doing businesses. But at the same time, as Kapil's presentation captured, the number of cybercrime and other type of incidents is also increasing around the world. And of course, India is not an outlier in that sense. At the same time, I think the speed at which things are happening, we are not keeping pace on the protection side as well as we should have done that. And this is something where the MSME's vulnerability to cybersecurity threats become extremely important for us to address. Now, what happens is when there's a breach in a big bank or in an insurance company or a large retailer, those are the type of things that make huge headlines in the newspapers and on TV channels and on the web and everywhere else. Whereas a small shop owner who may have even lost all his or her life savings due to a particular cyber attack, that thing might not even make it to any news. And on an individual basis, the amounts may be small. At an aggregated basis, as Kapil had mentioned, these numbers are really humongous. But because these are smaller incidents and many of them are not even aware about what to do, not just in terms of what to do in case of to protect themselves better, but also what to do in case they do face this type of challenges, or for that matter, even prior to that, whether they have actually suffered any cybersecurity challenge. Because as they say, in the realm of cybersecurity, there are only two types of organizations: those who have been hacked and those who don't know. So many of these MSMEs may not even know for years that they have already been compromised. So it's not just that they are vulnerable, they may have already been compromised, or for that matter, they even beyond that, they may have even suffered a loss, but may not have been able to figure out that this loss or this particular thing has happened due to a cybersecurity incident or some vulnerability there, and that's something that they need to take care of. So it is in this context that we are doing this discussion, and I've got a fantastic set of diverse experts, but of course with extremely rich experience amongst all of them individually, but more importantly collectively. So, and today itself we saw an article in the morning by my friend Rick Rosso at CSIS, who is also the Wadhwani chair on the US-India relationships there at the CSIS in Washington, DC. So he's also mentioned a lot about the role of MSMEs. And the role of MSMEs is not just about as individual businesses, but also very importantly, they are the linchpins of some of the largest companies. So for example, if we are looking, even let's say an automobile, now there may be an automobile company that we know of by the name, okay, that this is the car is coming from this company. But the fact is most of those components are not made by that company. And many of these are made by MSMEs, and they are the suppliers to these companies. And recently we saw one of the largest auto manufacturer in the world, a US company, had to sort of halt and slow down its production. For why? Because there was a shortage of certain chips. So the digitization and these type of activities are impacting not just in terms of cybersecurity by itself, but also in terms of the supply chain. And many of the MSMEs being an integral part of the supply chain management, both on the input side as well as on the output side, that is in terms of retailing and other activities. This is again something that becomes extremely important for us to address. And the other thing is because we are working right now with the US consulate, and Monica did mention about the cybersecurity area partnership between US and India. And I would just like to call out one in particular, which was signed on 30th of August 2016 between the US government and India in Delhi. And this is called a comprehensive cybersecurity framework for bilateral cooperation between India and US. And within that, obviously, MSMEs and the capacity building and these other exercises are also very important aspect of that. So in this context, let's explore some of the nuances and challenges as well as the opportunities in the space of cybersecurity, and how do we identify and develop and proliferate these best practices for the MSMEs, especially in not just, of course, right now the work is focused on the eastern part of the country, but the fact is once this toolkit of best practices is ready, this is something which will actually be of value all over the country across India. And hopefully it will also be useful with the small changes and some modifications in many other areas, including some countries where Monica herself has had rich experiences in the region and elsewhere. So with that, let me just start with Anil Bhardwaj. Now, Anil is with FISME, with the Federation for Indian MSMEs, a large organization. And so Anil, I would like you to focus within the 7 minutes, of course, on the challenges that MSMEs in particular face as far as cybersecurity is concerned. So it could be in terms of digitalization, or any other thing for that matter. And what type of gaps that you actually see in the support in the ecosystem. So maybe it's around awareness, maybe it's around capacity building, or there could be multiple things. But it would be nice if you could just focus on 3 important aspects so that we can request the other panelists to respond on some of those issues in a more focused manner. Thank you. And over to Anil.
Thank you, Deepakji, and thank you, Cuts, for giving me this opportunity to share some of the concerns that MSME face with regards to cybersecurity. First, a few words about MSME sector for those who are joining this debate first time. In India, we have over 60 million enterprises, which employ over 110 million people. But interestingly, 90% of them are unorganized. And 97% are proprietorship partnership firms. So less than 3% of them are actually companies. But what is more interesting is, so that would give us a flavor of what is perhaps we are going to discuss with regards to MSMEs, that the average employment in the MSME sector is less than 2. So the vast majority of them are nothing but self-employed people. During the last couple of years, what has changed is that there has been an enormous rise in the use of digital tools. Digital penetration has occurred faster than the time needed for preparing MSMEs, I think, for preparing their systems, processes, training manpower, partly because of the government push through GST, and partly in the last 1 year because of the COVID has made almost every business using digital tools. The entire process of income tax is faceless, custom filing is faceless, grievance redressal systems are increasingly faceless, e-commerce has taken off like anything. And all these are promising developments. But this sudden adoption of digital technologies have made these businesses vulnerable in many dimensions. So first dimension is, the reason is, when we are going to discuss about the challenges, is about the ignorance itself. And the presentation rightly points out, I think given by Kapil, that there is a lack of systemic evaluation of risk in the MSME sector. Uh, and it gets exacerbated because of the reliance on third party for compliances like chartered accountants. So they would be sharing a lot of data, their accounting information, filing of GST. Hence, they are quite unaware and unprepared of the cybersecurity risk also because of this third party's involvement. Then the question is that the meeting the cost of upgradation and the financial constraints. So even if many of them are that they need to upgrade the systems, but most of them are self-employed. I say they're very small units, so they lack the financial strength or financial resources at their disposal to actually carry this out. First is the ignorance, and even if they know, then the question that how to fund such an upgradation. And this becomes more difficult because the banks and the financial institutions, they also do not have the schemes, or they do not have enough understanding of the needs of this sector in terms of funding and upgrading the digital uh, infrastructure. The human resource is another challenge. Either they have to train their existing staff, or they may not be aware, or because they work with the third parties, so working with them also poses a challenge, because even if they are training their staff, then what would happen to the people who are working in the chartered accountant firm or the consultant firm. Then legacy system and interoperability of the different systems that are currently being used, like mobile, laptops, desktops. And so therefore a very weak understanding is there and clarity on the position on issues of data privacy also. And all these problems become even more critical because of lack of effective legal remedies and a weak judicial system that makes the whole process even more vulnerable. So firstly, I do not know that this can happen to me, but even if it happens to me, I do not know what are my rights and how I can take the remedial measures. And even if I have this information, the external system in governance, both in terms of legal remedies and the judicial system, is pretty weak. So the best thing is actually to take precaution, to be aware, to upgrade your own system, to build your own firewalls. That's the best remedy. And that's why I think it is very important and very valuable that CUTS, with the help of US consulate, is doing such programs. And I think it is strengthening the hands of institutions like ours, who are also working in the same direction with organizations like Amazon, etc. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anil, and thank you for helping me with the time management also. Okay. So Anil has already sort of articulated the type of challenges from the MSME's perspective. And obviously, there are some larger systemic issues that he did mention, for example, in terms of enforcement, as well as in terms of the slow and other judicial processes. Now, those are probably things which might not be within the scope of this type of focused discussion. But yes, they are nevertheless very important for us to take those ground realities into consideration while we are deliberating on such issues. So now let me bring in Karnika Seth. Now, Karnika has been old friend, and she's been writing, speaking, practicing cyber law for a long time. So, Karnika, I would like you to focus on what are the top 5 legal compliances that the MSMEs should actually be focused on. So obviously there could be hundreds of things that people may have to do, and obviously each of those, if you don't do this, this is the risk. If you don't do this, this is the risk, both in terms of your own systems, or for that matter in terms of uh, any penal actions or anything like that. What are the top 5 sort of compliances that they should be looking at in terms of prioritization?
Okay, very valid question and pertinent indeed. This is for the current discussion today. When it comes to compliances, there are definitely a number of compliances, both from the point of view of prevention and from the point of view when the incident has actually taken place, what needs to be done. So I'll briefly summarize the same. The first and foremost in terms of prevention, when we say, when we are employing people in the small scale industries or in the, MSMEs, basically there is a dearth of, as I see at least, paperwork in terms of legal policy framework. And a lot of times, the cases which we have handled so far have also, proven this fact that if there was a sound IT policy in the company, a social media policy, or IPR policy, those problems which occurred could have been prevented. So number one is, from that point of view, is very essential to highlight the relevance of the non-disclosure agreements and other appointment letters or standing orders which are created within the organization to safeguard both employees and employers, and organization as a whole from any kind of problems like data theft and other issues which may emerge. So that's number one. And secondly, alongside this is also important to highlight, many times there is a gray area, in India, in terms of whether this would be a breach of privacy of an employee if a CCTV surveillance is put, or other kinds of vigilance activities like email snooping or any kind of personal messages being trapped just to see the productivity. Many occasions, there has been a spyware or a malware, not really a malware, I would say, call it like a surveillance software installed by the employer just to check the productivity of the employee, whether he's actually concentrating on his work or not. But given this fact, I mean, this could be even a violation of privacy if this is not declared, so in the IT policy itself, that this can be done. And if there is a reasonable suspicious ground, then such software could be installed within their systems. So it's very important to highlight this fact because of the cases that we've kind of handled. Also, whenever an organization deploys technologies like DLP softwares or other measures to counter such attacks, it's important to give very clear-cut guidelines on whether a personal email of a employee can be actually used by him for work purposes. Many times they mix the devices, many times they mix the email accounts, and because of that, there are later on complications even for the employer and the employee, specifically if it contains any kind of confidential information of any third party or a client or even the organization. So many of these problems again could be avoided with clear-cut policies on that front as well. Secondly, the appointment of chief technology officer in a company is very, very important. Many organizations, however small or middle size, they don't have a chief technology officer, the monitoring guidelines to actually change the passwords frequently, and also ensure that the licenses are genuine and kept valid, for various softwares. And again, those kind of issues are very rampant found in the corporate institutions. Not only this, it is the chief technology officer who actually signs an affidavit in a court of law if there is an action which is to be moved under Section 65B of the Indian Evidence Act. Any printouts of logs or any details or emails or data, if relied on in evidence, will require his affidavit. So it's very important to have a responsible person within the organization who looks after the technology and the devices in the particular organization. Now, also the fact that if it is in an organization which handles sensitive data of people, for example, in the health industry, or it could have any other personal sensitive information like financial details of a consumer, then all the more a reason to have ISO 27001 or other such prescribed certification to keep the reasonable security practices in order in the organization to safeguard that data. That is in view of the fact that our IT Act has a section 43A where the body corporates have this responsibility to safeguard this information, and coupled with it is the deemed liability of directors under section 85 of the IT Act. They are supposed to monitor and be aware that there is no intentional or otherwise, the intention should not be there from the side of the directors or the responsible persons in the organization, nor knowledge that any crime is being committed within their organizations. And that cannot be proven by them unless there is clear paper trail, there is a clear footprint, and monitoring, due diligence practices within the organization. So that is also very important to highlight. And apart from that, there is a lot of fear in the people, that they don't want to mention any kind of incident, even if it's a ransomware attack or a phishing attack within their organizations. They don't want to reveal that, because if they report the same, it will be, they could be, considered as a stigma on the organization, or it would be defamatory. But that's not the case. There are a lot of instances, specifically if it involves data of people, it's important to give the incident response to the certain, and also officially inform the police, to take that action, because a lot of times these data, if stolen by outsiders, maybe hackers, it is important to mitigate the loss if there is any compromise. If that action is not taken and there is non-reporting, it could also lead to adverse inferences for the organization and its key board of directors. So it could be landing up the organization in a difficult position. And in order to avoid that, I think it's better to do incident reporting, and that's what's advisable. Apart from this, the remedies which lie in terms of compliance, when you've complied, when you've reported, there would be criminal remedies, there would be civil remedies. You can actually ask for injunction orders, blocking orders, takedown orders, compensation. And in many cases, the organizations also would have criminal remedies alongside the civil remedies. So it's not that one would be independent. It's like one's independent of the other. They could be running in tandem. Both of them could be, applicable. So depending on the facts of every case, one could look at, the remedies which lie. But overall, if you look at compliance is a multi-pronged approach. It's not just from the point of view of, something which you have to do in order to prevent the offense or a particular incident from occurring, but also safeguard the organization's directors, its employees, and people's data, if you've handled people's data. From the point of view of incident, and if the incident happens, then what kind of compliances are required, specifically reporting compliances and mitigation efforts, and backing up your data is very essential. So even if there's a compromise sometime, there could be a reset of a password, there could be automatically technologically sound manners, or I would say techniques or strategies to actually stop that data from being accessed by any third party. There could be technological ways of doing that as well. So I think one would need to encourage use of digital signatures and other technologies which encrypt data. So if the data is encrypted, even if it is lost, it cannot be opened again, so by any third party. So that's why it's important to use both legal measures and technological measures which are available today, use of AI or other softwares, DLP practices, VPNs, and so many other technical strategies and methods to safeguard, your organization and do your compliances. I think this gives the whole perspective in a nutshell, and I look forward to hearing the other panelists.
Thanks, Karnika, for condensing many of these nuances spread across not just the Information Technology Act, but also across several other legislations, including the Evidence Act, etc., and also giving people a flavor about not just in terms of what all they can do in advance, but also in case some adverse thing does happen, what are the recourses that they may have to take. And to me, it seems that probably in terms of the policy as well as in lawmaking, ultimately we need to create a nudge, I would say, for MSMEs especially, so that there is a more incentive for them to actually report for the problems rather than being concerned both around the reputation or other type of negative consequences that they may face in case of any reporting. But now let's move to something more particular. So you did mention a lot about sensitive data, personal data, even consumer data for that matter. And I would just add to that even the employee data, because when it comes to privacy, even that becomes an important aspect. So we also have Rahul Sharma with us, who was earlier with DSCI, and now, of course, with the uh, organization, the perspective that he runs this consultancy. So, Rahul, within the context of whatever we know at this point of time is, of course, the PDP Bill 2011 of December 2019 version. That's what we know in the public domain. We also have been hearing for more than a year that the government is working on a national cybersecurity strategy. So that's the second thing. And third is we also have this recommendation which came about 6 weeks back from the revised report of the NPD experts committee. So broadly, these three aspects. So the PDP bill 2019, we have the upcoming national cybersecurity strategy, and of course the latest report from the expert committee on the NPD, non-personal data. So across these three, what are the big elements that you see in terms of things that MSMEs should be specially be concerned about and be preparing? So what is the things that they should do as a forward looking measures? Not, so obviously Karnika has already mentioned a lot about what about the existing legal provisions, but in terms of the upcoming stuff, what all they should be looking at in terms of their preparedness, that okay, if I'm doing this, these are the type of things that I should be prepared for. That may or may not necessarily be finally coming in the law at some point of time or in the regulations, but these are the type of things that I should watch out for. So what are those few things? And again, I would also request you to please wrap up within 7 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you, Kutz and US Embassy for facilitating this important discussion on MSMEs, because as we know that MSMEs are not only the backbone but also like the frontier of growth that we are envisaging. So it's very important for the MSMEs to actually come to terms with the realities of the changing threat perception landscape of cyber threats that we are witnessing. And in that context, I mean, we already have various statutes, provisions, guidelines by the regulators, which talk about protection of information by the organizations, and they necessarily don't differentiate between small, medium, or large organizations. But as we increase our digitization journey, we'll have more specific regulations and guidelines, and also possibly categorization, as we have already seen in the personal data protection bill, that will try and focus on different aspects on how organizations of different sizes and operating businesses need to protect their critical assets, and what are their accountability as well as legal obligations that they need to fulfill. So one of the important things from the entire landscape policy and regulatory landscape viewpoint is that we are increasingly seeing that the compliance burden on the organizations is increasing. And in the initial part of the presentations, we discussed about different categories of MSMEs that they might be engaging in systematic data processing, or they might be just using data as a as something to coordinate their efforts, or data might be the real critical assets or the IPR of the businesses, as we are seeing more and more with the online digital services. So different organizations, depending on the business models, will the value of their data will increasingly differ. And with increasing compliance cost, wherein the organizations need to demonstrate that their practices for security and privacy are up to the mark, to provide insurance to the consumers and also to the regulators that their practices are robust and solid to protect their data. So definitely, like, compliance cost is going to be one of the very significant challenges for the MSMEs, and how the law tries to minimize these costs without compromising on the aspects of the exempting the organizations for protecting critical data and sensitive data of individuals. I think that's going to be a very important task. Second is the provisions of heavy fines and penalties that is being envisioned in different laws and regulations, which I think could be a significant barrier for their growth, because it might like it might lead to businesses running out of business, or sort of exiting businesses, and it might also be a potential entry barrier because of heavy fines and penalties. People might not want to get into these businesses because they see that it's going to be a big task for us to do that. So various provisions on how this can be managed can be thought about. So in one of the articles that I wrote recently, I talked about that the MSME especially should be allowed to earn back a substantial portion of of penalties, provided that if they have an accidental data breach, and if they do responsible reporting, and over a period of time they can demonstrate their compliance on like how or what they did to better their practices, allow people to earn back some of the fined amount. Uh, and also, like, we are seeing this because the revenues collected from fines and penalties, and this is across legislations and across geographies, it's being counted as a revenue source for the government. And if the government sees fines and penalties and revenue sources, they try to harp on it and more and more, so they sort of become addicted to it. So like, we have to sort of think out of the box and try to find solutions as to not overburden the companies, so that they don't they enter this space, they try and make use of the vast available value of internet and digitization that is becoming available to us. The third is that could also lead to organizations, if you have stringent provisions, MSMEs will be looking to relocate their headquarters outside the country. And this has been highlighted numerous times. But and also, I think this is on the radar of the government, because a lot of senior bureaucrats and ministers have spoken about it, that the Indian businesses need to register themselves here and not set up headquarters in some of the countries which offer lucrative value for registering, and give them tax rebates, etc. So from an organization viewpoint, what we are also seeing, and this hopefully in the upcoming years, what we'll see is you have different codes of practice that will be developed for various sectors. And you'll have the regulatory organizations, you'll have the associations playing a major role, and this has also been provisioned in the data protection bill, that the codes of practice is going to be developed and approved by the authority, the data protection authority, and then the organization need to self-certify or comply with it. As we've also seen, in the case of the EU-US Privacy Shield was such a framework wherein the organization need to self-certify, but that's been quashed by the European Court of Justice. But again, like, that's a good example of self-certification of organizations confined to basic set of principles. The second aspects, other from policy and regulatory, is, look at the process and technology point of view from an MSME viewpoint. Now, laws and regulations talk about privacy by design, that all your privacy processes, technology need to take that into consideration while you are designing them. Plus, organizations especially like need to make use of the privacy enhancing tools and technologies like anonymization, encryption, pseudonymization, homomorphic encryption, etc. All those things which can improve security and privacy simultaneously. And based on that, the organization's risk significantly goes down. Plus, as Karnika rightly mentioned about, if there is a breach, organizations need to report responsibly, and they also need to cooperate. When a breach happens, there might be investigation that follows. So, like, this, because of increasing digitization, MSMEs also need to focus on how they try and manage the entire spectrum of the data governance management, right from beginning of creation of data to the deletion of data. And that framework needs to be emphasized on for the MSMEs, especially the ones that have systematic or automated data processing, and which rely on data as a core business. And the third aspect is what we are seeing, that cyber hygiene for MSMEs has become such an important factor because their valuations depend on it. For example, if the organization has a good cyber hygiene, your cyber insurance premium actually goes down. So, in the initial part of the presentation, just for folks, the prioritization for MSMEs is expanding their scope of business and investing in expanding the assets and how to grow your business, and not cybersecurity and privacy are not the core focus. But I think that is something that needs to change with a change in mindset, because if we treat them as separate things to be done, cybersecurity and privacy, they will remain like an bolted on rather than an inbuilt thing. And since we want privacy and cybersecurity to become a part of culture, so like MSMEs have to be very understanding of what it does to their business. So ransomware attacks, or your data theft, your IPR, your patents, everything, copyright materials, everything could be lost. So I think from that viewpoint, it becomes very important for MSMEs to focus on these three different aspects, from policy, regulatory, the technology processes, and how it's seen as a key brand differentiators, the privacy and security. So yeah, I'll stop here, Deepak, and apologies for overshooting my time.
Thanks, Rahul. And so one of the things that we've seen through this whole discussion so far in the past 40 minutes or so is that although the term itself was not specifically used, but I could sort of discern that particular term or theme coming up was that on one hand, MSMEs have this major challenge in terms of awareness, in terms of capacity, both in terms of the technical, organizational, and the financial resources to deploy towards cybersecurity. And in this whole thing, one of the important things which is coming up over the past decade plus now is the increasing use of cloud technologies. So what's happening is that people are using a lot of cloud services. So whether it's infrastructure, platform, software, anything like that. So it could be, so for example, today, if you have to sign up a new merchant for digital payments, it's a very quick thing. Whereas earlier, and I've worked in a payments company, so I know a little bit about this. So it used to take a lot of effort in onboarding a merchant onto that particular service platform. So there's a lot which is happening in terms of the cloud itself. So cloud, so a lot of people say that they are not using cloud services, but the fact is almost everybody who's using any sort of IT, especially related to internet, they are using cloud willy-nilly, whether with knowledge or without even being conscious about using cloud per se. Now, when we are using cloud, I would say that there are two important aspects here. One is obviously the type of general IT services, or so whether it's about storage or backup or computing or anything like that, or even web hosting, etc. So we are using cloud services for that. And second is obviously there are a lot of cybersecurity solutions also which are coming in as a cloud service. So security as a service and many other variants thereof. So with these two aspects, I would like Ranjit, you to focus on what is it that people should be looking in terms of for whatever purposes you are using any cloud service for anything, what is it that you should be looking at in terms of security? So that's in general. And second, very specifically, what type of solutions for cloud security itself are available? So that means rather than, let's say, buying a particular antivirus software and running it on your desktop or on your mobile and things like that, what is it that you can do in terms of using these services itself as a cloud subscription model for services itself? And obviously, because you have been working within the Revit for past few years, now I think 3 years, you just completed your 3 years recently. And in that, especially for the financial services transactions, and there's a lot about this whole paradigm that, I mean, where do the attackers go? They go after the value. So what is that value that they can extract? So what is the value that they can extract? They often is getting reflected in terms of the value, monetary value. So it could be monetary value of the data that somebody sells, or it could be a monetary value of the fines or other type of penalties or reputation loss or a loss of market cap that one may face. So in this context, I would request you to focus on these two broad aspects. What is it that people should look at in terms of cloud security itself? And second, in terms of what type of solutions for security are available on the cloud?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I hope I'm audible.
You are audible.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So thank you, Kat, for this opportunity, and Deepak sir for laying out the contours of the response. What I would do is I would essentially zoom out a bit and look at the problem in terms of the aspect of cybersecurity for MSMEs more from a policy point of view. And what I see over here is a classic example of a market failure. Well, while there is a demand for the kind of cybersecurity products or the kind of cybersecurity awareness as well, for that matter, the open and free market has probably not been able to provision it as it should have. We often talk about costs being high for the MSMEs. What we are missing out is the bite-size products that we would have offered them are probably still not there. And one of the reasons why the adoption for cybersecurity practices is low is because the adoption costs are significantly high. And in that regards, I would like to bring to fore something that we have, it's a parallel kind of an example from the financial sector. In September last year, if you were to draw a parallel with the MSMEs in the financial sector, the cooperative banks closely come in that sense, wherein like somebody, like one of the August members pointed out that some entrepreneurs have a 2-member team, right? So even in the cooperative sector, you have banks which have just one branch that is manned by 2 people. And I think that some practices that we have been seeing, particularly what the RBI has been doing in that field, is something that we can definitely replicate with regards to the security of the MSME sector at large. What I'm proposing and I'm talking about over here is there was this 5-point strategy that came out, which the acronym is GUARD. It essentially stands for governance, oversight, utile technology investment, utile technology, there's appropriate regulation and supervision, robust collaboration, and the whole aspect of developing the IT infrastructure and cybersecurity skill sets. And one way in which this is sought to be promoted is through the idea of something that has been pitched as a community cloud. And the idea over here is to make available, maybe as a public good, a platform of sorts that kind of addresses the cost issue without becoming without kind of encouraging the free rider problem. So either through the MSME associations or a few of them coming together, or even there can be cases where if there are some bigger industries who are drawing a lot of MSMEs as their suppliers, a cloud-based platform that essentially puts all the IT part of the MSMEs in a cloud environment, and then that is offered to them. And like I said, then it becomes that bit-sized service. So if you want to use a certain product or a tool for you don't have the capacity to buy an entire toolkit or the entire suite of that particular service, then you could pick up that very pertinent functionality in this particular platform. So what this does is it helps onboarding of the MSMEs at a very lower cost, and they don't have to go looking for solutions, right? The whole aspect is you get onboarded on this platform, and then you get to pick and choose. So that could be something which could drive the way forward. Now, obviously, who would provision this would be a question. And while the first response would be that somebody from it would probably be the government who should be looking into provisioning that. Again, it is the open market who can come into for this one, because such a platform could then start off the journey for MSMEs to move entirely to the cloud. And in this space, then I see the big cloud service providers, I see the federations for MSMEs, I see industry bodies who could provision for such a platform, and in that way make it easier for the MSMEs to get onboarded to a secure environment in terms of their IT infrastructure, and B, from there on follow a journey which keeps them secure, as well as there is a higher level of assurance. What could happen in case such a model is adopted is that even the points that Rahul pointed out with respect to privacy and the like could be addressed, because now you are not looking at individual entities, but you are looking at an entire platform at large, and the disclosures, the fines and penalties, if any, would then become a thing which the platform would need to, or like it's put out as a community cloud would need to look at. So that is one thing that I thought that we could probably talk about for this particular panel. And what it could do is, it could become a marketplace of sorts for cybersecurity startups, as well as for the well-established companies to competitively pitch their solutions and products across this platform, as well as it would give the MSMEs an opportunity to, like I said, the bite-sized solutions would be available to them. And I think this could lay down the trend for adoption of cybersecurity in a larger scale as well. Like I began, I think that there is a need to address this particular thing as a market failure, and the market as well as the community needs to see as to what options they can get towards addressing this particular problem. So those would be my inputs.
Thanks, Sanjeet. And so now that we have heard from what the MSMEs face as challenges, we have heard about what type of legal provisions exist that they need to comply with. We have also heard about what are the potential legal compliances and other things that they may have to deal with in future, and also some of the solutions that might be coming up or are already available in terms of a bite-sized services, as Ranjit just mentioned just now. So with all these type of things, so what are the problems? And then, of course, what type of existing compliances, what type of upcoming compliances, and what type of opportunities or solutions might be available. Let me bring in Tulika Pandey here. She's director in the National E-Governance Division, but beyond that, she actually has a very rich and deep experience and across different functions within the government. So, and I've known her for a fairly long time. So whether it's cybersecurity itself, of course, very specifically within cybersecurity, but also in terms of the digital payments, internet governance, and many other areas she has worked on. So I would like you to focus on a few things specifically. One is in terms of what is it that people should be looking forward to in terms of upcoming policies and legislations. So that's one area. And second is we have a few questions already here. And some of these questions actually pertain to can the government think about offering cybersecurity itself as a service, maybe on a paid or a free basis? I mean, that's a different thing in terms of commercials, but basically more cybersecurity itself as an infrastructure. And also, what is it that people should be looking in terms of the capacity building itself in particular, especially considering that people, especially at MSMEs level, I mean, we are seeing this dearth of cybersecurity across the ecosystem, and this was part of the national cybersecurity strategy of 2013. The Prime Minister also had mentioned this in his speech on 1st March 2015 at the NASSCOM Silver Jubilee. So this is something, a common scenario even across big industry, but obviously it becomes extremely nuanced and critical and accentuated challenge for MSMEs. So what is it that the government is or could do, not just as central government, but also probably state government? And yes, I know that you may have a lot to say, but again, request you to please wrap up in 7 minutes. Thank you.
I do hope I'm able to keep the time. Thank you, Mr. Mishra. It's a pleasant meeting you again. Though I would like to first say good evening to all my fellow digital panelists, co-panelists, and also to my digital audiences, because we are all talking now in a digital world. And I would take this opportunity to applaud and also thank CUTS Kolkata and the US Consulate for bringing in this discussion. I have lots to say naturally, and I will try and contain myself, but most of my talk would be in terms of responses to my co-panelists' issues that they have raised. So, first of all, the one thing that I have been seeing, I mean, we in the MeitY, in the Ministry of Electronics and IT have been saying is, when we said it is important that each organization, appoints a chief information security officer. Our own government agencies were wondering as to why, because they felt they were not hosting enough such critical or data that they would need to secure, that most of their communication channels were within the office premises, and so the networks were almost kind of secure. So we have faced a big challenge in trying to get across to them the fact that each one of them are a weak link for us. And when we say that we need a chief information security officer, we do not just mean by way of designation, but more in terms of a person who is, adept enough to understand the implications of certain missteps or certain, steps being, not followed, the process is not being followed fully through. And it has taken us quite a while. Now, yes, we are in a position where we can claim that most of the public sector and the government have a CISO who's now getting more and more aware into what really security would imply. And so therefore, I come back to the same question that every SME and SMB would be thinking, why us? I mean, we are a small team, we are a 2-member team. And how does cybersecurity really become our main agenda? And who would really want to look into us, because we are not those big budget people, and what would they get out of us? And yet we know that many of them have faced not just ransomware attacks, but also other phishing attacks. Why are they being attacked? They're being attacked because A, their IPRs can be accessed very easily, and B, India today is called the bot capital. Do you know? We suddenly have jumped on top for a very wrong reason. And why so? That's because we have not really been able to understand the nuances of every, cybersecurity processes that need to be taken care of. We need to identify our critical data, our critical processes, our critical infrastructure, and even a single unit, SME, SMB, with 2 people, you yourselves are the IPRs. And your IPRs are very important, not just to you, but to the country too. And today, when the world is facing the challenge of supply chain management, we are facing a major issue on there. And that's where you all are our, the assets who would come in to help the country to build its own cybersecurity ecosystem. And this ministry has taken up several steps for that. I could mention a few while I'm talking about it. And the first one that all of you are already aware is that Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has a startup hub, which is very popular, which is a portal with more than 2,000 startups have joined already. It is a platform where all innovators, startups, mentors, VCs, tech industry people, all of them have been synergized together onto a single platform. So what happens is now we have been able to bring you all together to bring in, to sort of facilitate certain procedures and processes that otherwise seems daunting to many of you 3-member, 4-member teams. We've also been able to bring, facilitate a mutual soft landing program. So when we are connecting, we are bringing this cross linkages through mutual soft landing. Many of you have been able to actually build in security processes into your entire design and development process. That's 2. And third, this is a holistic framework which is connecting all the accelerators, the center of excellences that are spread across the country, the incubation centers, and the mentors, and of course the VCs. So this is one initiative of the government which may help you, which you may be able to make use of to bring in the security aspect too, along with your business development. And we also have another program called the Type 2, the Technology Incubation Development for Entrepreneurs. And we have 51 such incubation centers across the country. And we need the objective that we have is to at least support 2,000 technology startups. So these are the few things that we brought in. And of course, under our MSH portal program, we are also hosting a lot of brand challenges and hackathons with prize money along with it. And recently we had a hackathon for COVID, which is with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. In addition, I'm with the team of the cybersecurity, and we ourselves have brought out a grand challenge for startups, wherein we have given out 6 problem statements, and we are giving away a prize money of more than 1.13 crores to the winner. And low down, we are identifying 3 of these winners. We have gone to the last stage now, and very soon in May, you will see that we'll have 3 products that are actually market ready. So we are, trying, and this program is not just, we have said, we have launched this hackathon and expect it to come out through with the product, but we are also offering mentorship. And we are trying to, have these regular workshops with these participating teams to help them identify what should be the focus. And as rightly mentioned by some of my co-panelists earlier, that the focus is more towards the product, and therefore many times they have missed the very aspect of what their cybersecurity product would come for when it competes with an international market. And that's an observation that I thought I would also acknowledge that we've been trying to help them with. The 2 observations that I picked from Rahul mentioning that compliance is a burden. I do not think compliance can ever be a burden. Compliance is very important because, I can take the very simple example of all of us now suddenly using the seat belts, right? The government kept advising us, and we missed doing it. Still, they brought in a big fine, and we realized now it's become our habits. Therefore, for all of us citizens, all of us enterprises, each entrepreneur to have cyber ethics and cyber hygiene as a practice, because yes, I will have to acknowledge, and I'm sure most of you will acknowledge, that while we are using digital medium, while we are on the cyberspace, we really have not turned into digital citizens. We do not understand the the impact of us misstating or sharing a lot of our data on different platforms, or we are not yet very aware of the policies of our passwords and other such scenarios. And as Mr. Maheshwari already mentioned, I have faced the music when I was handling digital payment systems with many people actually, and I would not say that they were not literate or they were not educated. They were of the highest positions, sharing their OTPs. So this is a trust worthiness that we need to bring into our habit. We need to understand as to who would enter my bedroom and who has to be stopped right there at the drawing room. So this differentiation is not yet become a practice in our cyberspace. When we are on the cyberspace, we do not always follow these guidelines. And so therein, I felt that the compliance is not a burden, but today an essential aspect. And I would like to sort of reiterate this point here. And the fines are detrimental. And that's again, for the same reason, I would like to place this on the table, that please understand that the government is not at all inclined towards this. And you will see that the regulations come very late. The reason for the delay is for the technology, for these processes, for the services to first, bloom. And when we see that there's now need for a regulation to be come in, yes, under 70B, as Karnika had already mentioned, we do have a policy, we have a regulation that every incident be reported to the CERT India. However, as already mentioned by Karnika, many people do not follow. There is a fine there under Article Section 70B. We have an imprisonment and fine, and yet we have not been able to make it mandatory, and therefore many a times the lack of these incidences not being reported, we miss on bringing out the right advisories at the right time, and that would have saved many other agencies and units from suffering the same cyber attacks that the other unit has suffered. So this has to be sort of understood by each one of us as individuals, as enterprises, or as entrepreneurs as well. So now that I have covered these few issues, I would like to, with my understanding that I've had with these 2 years in this area, I have tried to sort of bring together a few issues. So one, I identified that most of our SMEs, SMBs are actually entrepreneurs, but they're actually generating employment opportunities with lower capital costs. So we really would welcome them much more in the country. But the reason why they need to sort of balance cybersecurity with us vis-a-vis the product development is because the attacks that they would suffer is much different from the attacks that the large scale enterprises suffer. So they really need to, they face this challenge of being, keeping aside a certain asset for cybersecurity.
Can I request you to please wrap up quickly? We are already way
So
beyond the.
I just want to say two important things. So one is they need to, each unit has to understand what is the degree of exposure to the cyber risk, and by the virtue of their business model and the existing IT infrastructure. Yes, we need to have a security preparedness understanding, and therefore to have a model for self-assessment, and therefore be able to assess and analyze our information, our infrastructure, our data. That's important. How do we safeguard them? What are our processes that we need to put into practice? And therefore, go for a cyber adoption domain mapping. So it has to be in conceptual policy management, data protection, access. I mean, you know what's important? You really need to set up a framework amongst you, the community of SMBs and SMEs, and identify that framework, and you can together, take care of the security piece that each one of you would otherwise find daunting if you go alone with the piece. So, okay, I'll wait till the next turn again. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. And so we already had a few questions in the chat box, but right now I'm not in a position to take up all those questions, although some of those I did address recently to some of the panelists. So as we are coming to a draw of this, to a close of this particular webinar, just want to mention two things. One is I'm going to request right now Sadia from the US Consulate in Kolkata for a very brief remark or question that she has. So that's one intervention. And after that, we may have one of the panelists doing a very brief response to some of the other comments. But one thing that we have seen in this whole discussion is this, that obviously there's a lot which is being done, but I think it's also important for us to create this type of a comprehensive, consolidated, bite-sized information, which is easy for people to understand and implement, rather than just being on different statute books and different publications, etc. And in this regard, I must applaud the ministry for one of the initiatives. Of course, there are many, but one particular initiative called ISEA, infosec-awareness.in is the website. And that's one where I would say it's got very useful, not just very useful information, it's also got information in a very user-friendly manner. So with a lot of animations and other things. So that's one resource that I would request people to do avail of. And I would just request now over to Sadia. And after that, let's take it. So we will be extending it by about 5 minutes. Okay, Sadia, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari. I mean, this was basically, I actually hoped that we could answer some of the questions which was there in the chat box, but that's fine. I think last, it's Arnav's turn. So Arnav will be, giving the vote of thanks, and over to you, Arnav.
Yeah. So before that, I just want to mention one thing, Sadia, that while some of these questions have not been addressed directly here, we shall be sort of addressing them in future through our course at cuts in this, in especially in the through the workshops where we'll have more time and expertise to go into those details level. But one thing that I would like to mention is this: that cybersecurity is something that we should look at just like we look at the healthcare. So whether it's about COVID, what is it that we are told? Okay, use the mask, social distancing, washing hands, etc. Even in terms of general healthcare, what is it that we are told? Pre and postnatal vaccination, basic hygiene, and basic nutrition. So if we take care of certain basics, as many of our experts have shared earlier, it doesn't mean that it doesn't guarantee that we will not have any exposure to any cybersecurity threats. It doesn't mean that we won't have any breaches, but our preparedness will be much better, our losses will be much lower, and our resilience and the chances of recovery will be much, much better and faster. So with that, I'll request now Arnab to do the vote of thanks.
So, firstly, please thank you, Deepak ji, and please allow me, on behalf of CUTS and the US consulate team, to thank you for this excellent moderation that you did. Our sincere thanks to all the panelists who had been here and who had given so much insightful comments, and their shared their understanding and insights on the various issues of cybersecurity. It's coming from various coming from various different people from the business, from media, from business, from the government, from various practitioners, technology experts. It makes a lot of, this has been a very rich conversation, and I'm sure this we will be this will all these takeaways we will be incorporating in the report that will be circulated very soon, and also the way forward in designing the training manuals. And I could say, like, get very good inputs on which are the issues we should be looking at while doing these capacity building workshops. That's exactly also the idea of this kind of a webinar, where to reach out to experts like all of you and get your feedback on the way forward. So with that, in the end, I would like to thank the US consulate team, especially Monica and Sadia, Shomi, and Rupam, who were all there, who were there in facilitated this. Our all colleagues from CUTS who had made worked hard for making this webinar work in a very short span of time. We would look forward to getting in touch with all of you in the days to come, and get your feedback on further feedback on the way forward, or how we are doing the compendium, etc. So thank you. This is not an end but a beginning, and we'll keep engaging with all of you. Thank you.